here with Jenni Skyler. Jenni is a licensed marriage and family therapist and internationally certified as a sex therapist with the International Association of Psychosexual Therapists. She founded the Intimacy Institute for Sex and Relationship Therapy almost 14 years ago. She now runs it with her husband, who is also a sex therapist. Thank you so much for being here today, Jenni.
Oh, thanks for having me, Heather.
Of course, of course. So I am so excited that you're here because what you do is not talked about. It's something that we kind of hide as a culture, but it's really needed. So I'm very curious to know how you chose this line of work. Why sex therapy out of all of the different therapies?
Yeah, well, there's a longer story to that. The short story I usually say is that I grew up in a family system with just my father, who is a medical doctor and pretty sex positive. And so I had a lot of books and I had a lot of education, and it was never like a secret subject. And so I ultimately became the Dr. Ruth of my friends, and it became a very easy space to fill and kind of fun. And all of that is true. I don't know if that would be enough to inspire me to be a sex therapist versus just a hobbyist. Um, the part of my story that I don't always share, but I am more recently, just because I think it's important, is my mom, who was a cocaine addict and um, and died one ultimately, but became lost in drugs because of her own incest and sexual abuse. That really deeply inspired me to help women like her reclaim their sexuality. And so my happiest sessions are when it's just a one-on-one with a woman and she's doing the hard work to just be in her body and reclaim, feel the hard stuff and voice it, especially if it's in a frozen place, and reclaim. And it's something that I ultimately couldn't do for my mother. Not that it's my job or my responsibility, but as
Mhm.
I'm going to save my parent and then I'll have a parent, and I
Yeah.
couldn't. So, I think all of us who go into psychology, whatever field we ultimately choose it because of our own hardships and challenges, and hope that we can help others heal something along those lines. So that is why sexuality really came to the forefront. And then, like, again, the sex positive stuff it was easy and it was fun. And I could have focused more on trauma, but I think that I chose sex therapy because there is a little bit more of a lightness around it. To be in the trauma field all day, every day, I think I would have burnt out personally.
Mm.
So I say I do kind of like trauma light, but I really help couples and individuals just be in their utmost satisfaction they can possibly, find.
Mm, and that is such important work, and thank you for your share in your own story. That resonates for sure. We all do that in some way. We um, often can sometimes carry the responsibility of fixing or saving the parent that we cannot, and yeah, it makes sense too. Kind of aligning with the parent who had such a positive, safe influence on your life. So that's pretty cool that you see both sides of that and you have that insight and awareness to how you were influenced and developed and why you made the decision that you made around your career and focus.
Thanks.
Yeah, yeah. And it's developed into this big thing. Like founding an institute is a big deal. Tell me more about that. What is that like? What does your day-to-day look like?
Day to day, I mean, I'll just back up. I know it sounds more glamorous institute than it maybe is. I think originally when I built my business plan, I really did want a for sure, like, brick and mortar building where I was training a ton of therapists and sending them out to the world. And I did begin my career that way. I mean, I named it the Intimacy Institute because I liked the alliteration, I'll be honest.
Yes, I get that.
And I also, was doing a lot more than just therapy with couples and individuals. I was doing public speaking. I had a column for the newspaper. I was running retreats, and I was training therapists a lot in terms of doing some sexuality trainings. And it was fun, and it was a lot. And then I had kids, and I just sort of started to slow down. And then COVID hit, and I went online. And so what was a very sort of big sex enterprise has become a much smaller therapy business, and more manageable. I mean, I still do Adam and Eve work, which is a sex toy company, and present them. And, I write for the media on occasion. But the Institute, maybe it's not misleading. It's kind of like a sex enterprise. I guess I have my my hands in a lot of buckets, if you will.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I think that is part of being a human and being a therapist is really reevaluating your capacity, especially as you grow and change and things shift and take precedent. Being a mom is no easy job, and to
Yeah,
hear how you're holding that is a lot. And being a therapist can be hard, tough work. And I hear you when you say, like, I chose sex because it can be light and fun and positive. And also, I imagine you're holding really hard story and really hard body states throughout your practice.
for sure, for sure. I mean, some people it's just, tweaking their sex life. Other people it's healing from really devastating affairs, and it's, you ask the day to day, some people it's sexual functioning, for instance, how's the orgasm, how's arousal, how's desire, how are erections. Um, for couples, it's usually desire discrepancy. What is the space in between the two people that they can't seem to navigate? Uh,
Mm,
where do we heal from mistrust and betrayal? Um, how do we navigate if somebody feels like they have zero going on in their sexuality? And how do we navigate if somebody has so much going on it's compulsive? Right?
mm,
So that's sort of a glimpse into the day to day.
mm. And those are important questions, I think, in um, therapy that is not sex therapy focused. Sometimes I imagine therapists don't ever get to those areas of someone's life because they haven't done that work themselves. So you're minding this huge gap in care, but so important. I mean, I think sex and pleasure and connection with a partner or even with self, with body is something that is almost a public health issue. Like, we struggle so much in that.
100%. I can't tell you how many people come to me after having done lots of work with lots of therapists, whether it's a couples therapist or individual, and they just don't touch sex, or they start to touch sex and the therapist doesn't know how to navigate it and refers out.
Mhm.
Lot of my population.
Yeah. What is that like for you, hearing when a therapist can't hold that space and yet knowing it's so important for that work to be done?
It's I understand it because what I often do is just a lot of psychoeducation in the beginning. I dispel a bunch of myths. We unpack the social narrative around sex and how unbeneficial it is. Um, so sex therapy is its own field, it's its own training. And so I don't expect normal therapists to necessarily have trained in that. To be able to weave it into the intake and make sure it's part of the bigger clinical picture, I think is important. And I find that that's sad if a therapist can't do that, but I think most therapists can weave it into the clinical picture on a very general level. But to do that deeper dive is its own field for sure.
Mm. How do you know that line? Like, what do you encourage therapists to look at to assess within themselves, within their practice, with clients, when to refer out, when to further their own education, look at their own countertransference?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, all of that. I mean, if there's countertransference for sure, and to get supervision around that. Um, if they can't answer the questions or they just start to feel like they're grasping for straws, that's a good moment. There's definitely a lot of trainings out there. I'm mixed about some of them. Um, but there's definitely trainings out there. And I'll say, even with my own field of sex therapists, because I used to train them, there's a really important training for sex therapists, and I argue actually for all therapists. It's called a SAR, the Sexuality Attitude Reassessment. And basically, you go through a weekend or a week of material in the workshop to see your own personal feelings and beliefs and judgments around different material that is sexual in nature.
Mm.
How do you feel about masturbation? If a client wants to talk about masturbation, do you get activated? Do you not? Can you stay grounded and offer support to the client? What about gender? Can you stay grounded? Sexual orientation, can you stay grounded? The fetishes, a kinky lifestyle, can you stay grounded? I would say most, and I've done this training for general therapists too, and they might not have quite as much capacity as a sex therapist. But there are certain topics that I'll say even sex therapists are like, ooh, that's tricky, like bestiality. It's the rare sex therapist that can stay grounded and do that work. I usually get everybody's referral, by the way, because it's not a pleasurable area for therapists, right? It's tricky.
No. Yes.
And I think because I train people in that, I'm grounded about it. But everybody has that edge, right? Pedophilia, that's an edge for a lot of people, but some therapists can do it. There's some tricky topics around sexuality that a lot of, so I think that training, what the training does is it teaches you about your own edges and your own judgments that you may or may not be privy to.
Mhm.
Like, oh, okay, I'm going to refer out for this one, or I'm going to get some supervision for this one, or, oh, I could totally handle this one.
Totally, totally, and it's so important to know your bias, your judgment, even your own levels of disassociation. Um, w how have you figured that out for yourself as far as what you can hold, what you can stay grounded in, your
Oh,
limitations?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've had to work on my own disassociation a ton over my life, but it's only in conflict with a marital partner, or, a romantic partner. It's not with clients.
Mhm.
It's like, oh, I'm like, I love and care about my clients, but I don't have enough, like, I'm not in a relationship with them in a way that they're going to push my buttons.
Mm. I get that. So you had shared that your husband is also a sex therapist, and one, I can't even imagine being married to another therapist, much less another sex therapist.
Hmm.
And I think in my mind, I have so much curiosity around like what is even sex like between two sex therapists when you have this idea of like, oh, they have it all figured out and they know all this stuff. Like, how do you hold that in your own marriage and just even burnout, fatigue? Do you come home talk about work? Do you like,
Yeah.
how do you separate yourself and hold your autonomy, your identity when you both are so aligned?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of Venn diagram overlap. I wouldn't say it's enmeshed. I think we do. I think we have so many other things going on that are of interest to us, in terms of our community and our kids and our hobbies, that we definitely talk about work. And I'll come to that in a moment. But it's not like we just get sucked into the rabbit hole and only talk about work. I think we
Mm,
end up chatting about work when it's either super interesting, we want to share with each other, or we need to process through something because we're stuck or there's countertransference.
hmm,
So, and then we have each other, and it's amazing to have another therapist who knows the lingo and knows, oh, when he's like, I think you're struggling with countertransference with this client because it's like your aunt, or, because
hmm,
he's so well, it's an easy, quick, like, connection. And I go,
hmm,
oh, yeah, that's totally true. Kind of work through it. It happens in super speed. So I think that having that similarity is delightful. And then we also vibe
hmm,
with each other. So we're able to build out our theories and ideas. And we've built out so many different theories. Like, we have a bunch of video courses, for instance, and a lot of that material is based on our own marriage, where we have just like
hmm,
flat on our face, had to figure out our way out of it. And we go, oh, here's like a process that works, and
hmm.
try it out with some of our couples. Oh, it works. Okay, so now let's like actually teach it. So that's been super useful in terms of both being therapists. And, he has his own clients. I have mine. Sometimes there's overlap in terms of I'll see the couple, he'll see the individual, or vice versa. So then there is coordinated care, but oftentimes we're too busy to talk about our clients too much.
That's very fair.
And we're really good with boundaries. It's like we see the client, we put it to bed, and we don't.
Mm.
It's like, okay, now it's time for family time and food and kids, and like, and they're at an age that they take up a lot of our time, and we love it. So I don't think we get lost in that. But I'll say that, you asked a question around what is sex like for us. Do we have it figured out? What we have figured out is that there's different kinds of intimacy. Intellectual intimacy we share is part of our foreplay because we both love talking psychology and going deep into everything, not just our clients, but like just how we see the world and process the world. That ability to do that emotional depth that I think is kind of rare, right? You can do it with the rare friend. Certainly my therapist friends, I can go deeper for sure, but it's a different world. And so that's its own kind of foreplay, right? I think also because we're so good about talking about sex, we can just really just name a spade a spade. It's like, yeah, we've got 10 minutes. This is going to be very mechanical, maintenance sex, right? High five. Okay, let's go. Or, oh, the kids are at school. We both have Friday off. Let's build out an hour together and really like luxuriate in it.
Mhm.
What
Mhm.
want to luxuriate in it, and is there any shame in talking about, we don't have any shame in talking about fantasies. Like, so I think that our ability to talk about everything helps us kind of cover a lot of ground. Is it still long-term monogamy? Yeah.
Mhm.
Got to get creative, but we know that.
Yes.
It's sort of like, okay. And if there's a lack of creativity, it's also like, well, we can't be creative for every single sexual contact. It's just not going to happen. We're busy, but we know that it's not we don't, if we go a long time without having sex, or if there's just more maintenance sex where it's like, okay, great, we made that happen, we feel connected, but it's not like, the best sex of our lives, no sweat off our back. It's not like it compromises our connection.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think you're naming such important pieces that is so applicable to everyone, and you're really normalizing a lot of different things, so thank you. Just around the different types of intimacy, a deeper connection, an emotional connection, like so many things that often when I'm sitting with people can be missing. Or what do you do when one partner wants to go deeper or they want to explore more sexually and the other doesn't? Like when
Right.
they're, you had a word for it earlier and I forgot the word. Um,
Desire discrepancy? Or
yes. Yep.
yeah, navigating that space in between for sure. And I think a lot of people struggle because it's hard to know what their desires actually mean and how to name that. Like
Mm,
plenty of men, who want to be cucks, right? And cuckolding is this activity where, they want their wives to go and have sex with other men, and they either stay at home and know what's happening, or they watch,
mm,
participate. And I've unpacked that with a few of my clients. And when you unpack it, there's actually a deeper level of shame and feelings of unworthiness that they can't give their partner pleasure, or that they
mm,
aren't enough, or maybe feelings of abandonment. If they go do that, but they come back to me, I'm worthy, and she won't abandon me. So it's almost
mm,
test versus a sexual desire. It shows up as a sexual desire because so often our deepest fears and our deepest sources of pain become eroticized. Erotic Mind, that wonderful book, talks about. And so we've eroticized a lot of our trauma, but when we unpack it and get to that layer and heal that layer, sometimes these desires morph, I'll say. And I'm not here
mm,
to like morph your desires and take them away or say they're bad. That's not my judgment at all. My intention is to help drop deeper. But one of the things that I find too is when a couple struggles with sex, they often struggle intellectually or emotionally as well in those levels of intimacy. Too much emphasis on the sexual connection to be what connects them. Because if you do have a deep emotional and intellectual connection, there's not as much stress on the sex. It's like, great, it's icing on the cake. When it happens, it happens. I don't feel disconnected from you. I'm not worried you're going somewhere because we're still connected, right? Look at the bigger clinical picture of all kinds of intimacy and the ways we connect as humans, right? The affectional ways, the intellectual ways, the emotional ways, and also the sexual or sensual ways.
Yeah, and I think that's so important to understand clinically and also just as a human in relationship or partnership or looking to dive into partnership as what are the things that I need and want in order to hold a whole body, whole minded connection with someone. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's, yeah. I mean, we live in a very sexualized society. And so it's often sex forward, um, and so it can be in my work, I find it can be difficult to slow down or take a step back and really look at or evaluate what's really going on here emotionally and grounding someone in the emotional work first,
Mhm.
because it's not so grabbable, if you will.
Yeah.
Like you said earlier, sex is fun. Sex is right. If I'm having good sex, then we have a healthy relationship. And that's not always the case.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. There's a lot of couples, that will have a lot of sex and they'll have great sex, but it's the only way they know how to connect. And so they find that all the other areas are fractured and they need work
Mhm.
there. And we
Yeah.
do live in a hypersexualized society and yet also in a very like shame-ridden society. It's like polarized that way. And
Yes.
that healthy middle is oftentimes missing. And furthermore, even in the hypersexualized parts of our society, there's so many myths that we're operating by that just don't serve us. So, I would say half my intake sessions oftentimes are just let's unpack the myths, let's deconstruct what you're doing because you're operating by a narrative that doesn't serve you and honestly doesn't serve most of society.
Mm. Yeah, I would agree with that. What would you say, like, if we were to kind of deep dive into some of the myths, what are the top myths that you have found that people hold, that we hold as a society, as a collective?
I think there's a big myth that penetration or intercourse is the only form of sex, and if you're not having it, there's something wrong with you.
Yep.
I think there is a myth that, if your penis doesn't become erect immediately or ejaculates too quickly, something's wrong with you. Like biological function, it's an important biological function to ejaculate very quickly. About us, in terms of the animal species, most animals get in, get out, and because you can't sit there and luxuriate in sex as an animal, you're gonna
You're gonna
right.
get eaten, yeah.
So biologically, we're meant to ejaculate quickly, but then we feel so much shame if we do, right? Um, and we're no longer 15. Well, my clients are not 15, right? So the wind doesn't blow and the erection emerges. Like there needs some stimulation, right? It's something. More needs to happen there. So I think that's a myth, and I think there's also a myth around, and I'll talk heterosexually for this one. I think queer couples have maybe an easier time with understanding the lived experience of the other person if they sort of share a physiological body of the same person. But when you have a heterosexual relationship, I think when there is a dramatic difference in testosterone, and there often is between a man and a woman, it's hard to understand the lived experience of a lot of testosterone. So a woman doesn't quite understand that. And then a man doesn't understand the lived experience of basically no testosterone, right? Comparatively, just do not have the kinds of numbers that a man has. And so testosterone as a sex drive hormone is our motivation. It's what creates the hunger inside, allows us to have easy access to arousal. So oftentimes I have these couples with discrepancies around sex, and oftentimes they're heterosexual, and oftentimes it's man wants more than woman. Now, this is all turned on its head because there's plenty of people where this is all different. And those are outliers, and I can speak to them. But the general majorative is this, right? And just having a conversation about the lived experience of a man versus a woman so that they can put themselves in the shoes of the other dispels a bunch of myths.
Hmm.
Because sometimes men are like, I don't understand why you have no arousal. Like, where is it? Right. And she's like, I don't understand how you have arousal all the time. Right. You
Yes, I hear
great
that all the time.
testosterone, they'll be like, oh, I get it.
Yeah. Yeah, it really closes that gap of dissonance, and that makes a lot of sense that it's something that is not necessarily controllable, but happening in the body, and
Yeah.
I imagine that creates a lot of safety for individuals who are blaming or feeling shamed about their function or capacity, ability to step into something that maybe is yearned for or wanted. We don't have to go here, but I met you at a MAPS
We can get there.
conference,
We can
MAPS
get there.
training. Um, I'm curious to know, have you done anything with that? What is that world
Yeah.
settling in the work that you do?
So just for your listeners, I mean, MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, and we did the training in MDMA, which is not yet legal. So no, I'm not doing anything underground, just because. I mean, first of all, finding MDMA is difficult, and secondly, because I'm licensed, I feel nervous about executing that. I'd like to offer it to couples because I think it'll be game changing in terms of doing therapeutic work and having the couple be together in a connective way with the, fear factor out of the room in a way, right? That's the whole point of MDMA is, to make the amygdala go offline so that we're more courageous to have those courageous conversations, to navigate trauma, to navigate the conflictual conversations that are just more difficult in sober moments. So
Mm,
the moment it's available, I hope to be able to use it for couples. I know it won't be sanctioned for couples, so I'll have to figure that out, but I'm excited about that. Now, psilocybin, where I live in Colorado, is decriminalized. So I've definitely sat on occasion with a client, if they want to show up to a session with psilocybin in their system, I'm not going to say yes or no, right?
mhm, mhm,
You know what I mean?
mhm. Yes,
Uh,
yes,
okay, you showed up with psilocybin in your system. Well, all right. Well, you did that, and well, we're doing therapy.
yes,
Great.
yes.
You know what I mean? So because it's decriminalized, I feel more comfortable with that approach. Beneficial for people, definitely, to kind of unpack some of their pieces there. It's not. I don't love psilocybin as much as I love MDMA
Same, same.
in terms of therapy.
Well, and the safety, the tether, the levels of disassociation are, I imagine, very different.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Mhm,
I think there's always value you can extract out of it, but it's just not the. Yeah, I'm with you on all that.
mhm, yeah. Well, and I mean, I'm in Washington where we haven't decriminalized anything yet.
Mhm.
So it's very far off in the distance for practitioners. We have ketamine, which is great, but it's highly dissociative. So that's a whole different beast in itself when we're trying to bring people into body and grounded. And
Right.
so, yeah, just
Yeah.
curious around kind of what different states are doing. And
Mhm.
so, yeah. And I imagine with couples and MDMA, that would be hugely impactful and,
Yeah.
powerful for those who would be a good fit.
Totally.
Yeah, yeah.
Totally. So I look forward to that.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm,
And
mhm,
ketamine is totally legal where I am, and I've had plenty of clients where, they'll use it for depression and it's game changing. You know,
mhm.
I mean, that for depression and suicidality is game changing, but that's not quite the work I'm doing, right? So, I support it. I definitely have great relationships with psychiatrists, different psychiatrists. But MDMA is where it's at for me with
Yeah.
couples.
Yes,
Really.
yes. Same, same. Um, Very quick before we And I'm very curious about your own self-care. Like, often as a therapist, we hold our own stories and, very vulnerably, you shared some of yours very lightly. How do you care for yourself in the work that you do as you want to grow and develop, but also have taken a step back due to capacity? What has that been like for you?
I think there's the acute self-care and more global. I mean, on a more global level, I have done my own work with psychedelics. Um, and, I have a therapist and, I'm continuously doing that, and exploring that terrain and growing and extracting value and integrating, right? So I think on a global level, that's been happening for 6 years with some psychedelics and not very frequently with psychedelics, right? You can't do it frequently. It's a seasonal kind of thing, at least for me. Um, so, that definitely is in my system. I've done tons of therapy over my lifetime. You don't get to hear without therapy, for sure. And I've had different kinds of therapy. I've done attachment work. I've done somatic work. I have a person who's more like Jungian somatic blend. It's like I kind of, I'm 43, so I've had sort of like multi-year chapters with different people to kind of like explore and unpack. And I think there's
Mhm,
a lot more still there that lives, because of my particular childhood. I think there's a lot more that lives in like Pandora's box of repression
mhm.
that, would I love to have access to at some point? I really would, but it's hard to get that access sometimes. And I've learned not to be in a rush, and I've learned not to feel like I'm broken if I don't have access immediately. That's a huge
Mm,
piece in terms of my resilience and my joy. I definitely walk my dog every morning, you know, before I do anything. That's not true. I feed my kids and I send them to school. Then I walk then I walk the dog and I do my morning walking meditation and I think about gratitude. I try to locate joy in my body. I love IFS, internal family systems. So I have all my like parts and I have my main parts that are usually like the parts that like to drive my car. And so
mhm.
to those parts and we powwow about the day. And I try to just be in good relationship with them and ground myself and ground them so that I can operate from self energy as much as possible. Aware of like where my fears are, like I have my various fears, right? In terms of those parts. Um, so that is a more acute self care, that dog walk with my parts, I would say. I also make sure I move my body every day, whether it's a long dog walk, whether it's sprints in the gym, whether it's a bike ride, whether it's I live in Colorado, so I'm super outdoorsy. I like to
Yeah, and
hills.
ripped. You
I
are
s
ripped.
Thank you. I like to ski uphill, I like to bike, I like to hike, I like to swim. I mean, I like to do it all. And for me, like, that's where my, like, endorphins come from is, like, when I can exercise, and so getting
Mm,
into my body, especially in an intense way, and part of my work is when I can't do that or when I need to rest, to be okay with the rest too. Um, so that's part of the self-care as well. So I would say my therapist, my exercise, my morning dog walks, and honestly not booking so many clients in a day, like keeping a balance. And I don't because I don't really have childcare. So my husband and I tag team who takes the kids to school and who picks them up and I coach my kids' soccer team and I would say I'm really at this point in my life very much part-time therapist because I get to be mom. And I only
mhm.
get them for another decade until they're off and about, and so then I can do
Yeah,
more stuff later.
yeah, you gotta make the most of it while you have it.
Yes,
Figure out what that balance looks like for you and how to take care of yourself so that you can continue doing the important work you're doing.
totally. And I have, like, a paper calendar, and I circle the hours I'm willing to see people, and I don't go past that boundary.
Awesome.
I can't because there's, like, times I have to literally show up to, like, drive a car and get kids, but that
Yeah,
keeps me accountable to, "All right, here's that boundary."
yeah, and that's hard to be accountable to your own boundaries unless you've really done that work, to be self-disciplined and self-accountable, so,
Yeah.
yeah, it shows your strength.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for penciling us in today. I appreciate your time because it's very valuable. So, and thank you for sharing and so much wisdom, so much insight. You're brilliant.
Oh,
So,
well, thanks for inviting me, and I hope it's helpful to your listeners.
of course. And for everyone listening, thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you next week.